Yasodananda Prabhu, please accept my humble obeisances. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Thank you very much for coming, Prabhu's wonderful Zoom meeting we'll have. So just a quick introduction to Yasodananda Prabhu and Visvakarma Prabhu. They both joined in the early 70s. Yasodananda Prabhu joined in 1969. He traveled all over India. He was also a teacher at Vrindavan Gurukula. And then he opened many temples and centers. Visvakarma also, Prabhu has a similar biography. He joined Srila Prabhupada in 1971. He bought the Toronto temple. He was the temple president of Toronto from 1975 to 85. He was also a temple president's chairman for North America. Devotees elected him to be the chairman. Go ahead, Vishwakarma Prabhu.
Yes, thank you very much, Bhakta Ron. It's our pleasure to be here today to discuss the history of Iskcon and help others understand that are interested in Krishna consciousness how to take up this process with the same understanding that we had according to Prabhupada's teachings that he gave us in the spreading of his movement. And Prabhupada was a spiritual avatar that was able to do the most amazing things for spreading Krishna consciousness. And we are fortunate to have had his association. And I'm very happy to do this Zoom call with the two of you, and especially with Yasodananda Prabhu, who was instrumental in the construction of the Krishna Balarama Mandir in Vrindavan. And he also supported financially the construction of parts of the Mayapur project in the early years. And he was also the headmaster of the Gurukula system for the Iskcon movement, appointed by Srila Prabhupada. So today we're going to discuss a very important letter about how Prabhupada didn't want the Iskcon movement to become a centralized management system, but rather a system based on the independent development of the centers by the local president and working along in cooperation with what Prabhupada called was his zonal secretaries, who would assist him in supervising the growth of the movement, which started to proliferate in the early 70s as a result of his potent preaching work. So Yasodananda Prabhu, if you could please refer to the letter and we'll carry on with the discussion.
Hare Krishna. I just want to make a little correction note. Basically, with regards to the construction of the Krishna Balaram Temple, the Mayapur, Long Mall, and other projects, Guru Kripa, basically, I was working under Guru Kripa, and we had what's called a Namhata party. We went to America and Japan and did various collections for Srila Prabhupada, and under his direction, we basically collected all these funds and these temples were made. I also had the privilege and opportunity to work with Mahamsa Swamy and Kirtananda Swamy in 1975-76 with regards to fundraising and construction of the temple in Hyderabad, Andhra Pradesh, India. This was a very interesting project because we did a lot of travel throughout South India, particularly Karnataka and Tamil Nadu, and visited many special places and met with many Vaishnavacharyas. Wow. So that was a very interesting project under Srila Prabhupada's direction. Now, today what we're going to be discussing is a letter from Srila Prabhupada to Kirtananda in basically late 1972. And the reason why this letter is so significant is because, you know, Prabhupada formed the GBC in 1970 with the direction of management. But soon after the GBC had been started in 1970, in early 1972, there was some attempt to change the structure and formula of what Srila Prabhupada had established. So the GBC had held certain meetings in March and April of 1972, some GBCs, but they did not invite Srila Prabhupada to these meetings. And they tried to restructure the management of Iskcon. So at that point in early 1972, Prabhupada suspended the entire GBC, and he wrote various telegrams and various instructions that these kind of meetings where he was not invited, other members of the GBC had not invited, that Prabhupada was not very happy. As a matter of fact, he wrote one very ominous letter in 1972 in April, that what will happen when I'm not there, will the GBC spoil everything? I'm paraphrasing. Prabhupada was concerned. So in the next several months, there was numerous letters that had been written by Srila Prabhupada with regards to the function of the GBC, Prabhupada's intention and direction of what he expected them to do. So this letter is quite significant because it gives a lot of important points, the directives from Srila Prabhupada. The letter is dated December 22nd, 1972. Srila Prabhupada does the usual blessings. Please, dear Kirtananda, please accept my blessings. I'm in due receipt of your dated December 11th, 1972, and I've noted the contents with care. And Prabhupada deals with various points with regards to the printing of his books. Now, it's important to remember here, Kirtananda held a major role in 1970, 71, 72 in the structure of the Iskcon movement and the printing and distribution of Srila Prabhupada's books. Kirtananda was one of the major leaders, and also with his brother Keshava, he had started the distribution of big books. Prior to Kirtananda and Keshava, this was done in San Francisco. Under Kiranda's direction and Keshava's direction, different devotees, Bhutatma, another devotee, Yogesh Chandra, Buddhimanta, Sarvabhauma, Premarnava. There were different devotees. In Iskcon, nobody had done big book distribution. So Keshava and Kirtananda structured this program of getting these devotees out there to start distributing big books, because up to that point, devotees had been distributing smaller books like Ishopanishad, smaller books like Beyond Birth and Death, Easy Journey to Other Planets, small books. But these devotees, under Kiranda's direction and Keshava, his brother, somewhere or other, they figured out how to distribute big books, like the Krishna book, the Nectar of Devotion, the large Bhagavad Gita. So this was a very, very major event in the history of our movement, how they did that. So by 1972, late 72, Srila Prabhupada wrote this letter to Kirtananda where he discusses how to get books to India and the printing with, at that point, they were printing in Japan with Dai Nippon. And at one point in the middle of the letter, Srila Prabhupada says, regarding your points about taxation, corporate status, etc., I have heard from Jayatirtha, you want to make big plan for centralization of management, taxes, monies, corporate status, bookkeeping, credit, like that. I do not at all approve of such plan. Do not centralize anything. Each temple must remain independent and self-sufficient. That was my plan from the very beginning. Why are you thinking otherwise? Once before, you wanted to do something centralizing with your GBC meeting. And if I did not interfere, the whole thing would have been killed. Do not think in this way of big corporation, big credits, centralization. These are all nonsense proposals. Only thing I wanted was that books printing and distribution should be centralized. Therefore, I appointed you and Balarama to do it. Otherwise, management, everything should be done locally by local men. Accounts must be kept. Things must be in order and lawfully done. But that should be each temple's concern, not yours. Krishna consciousness movement is for training men to be independently thoughtful and competent in all types of departments of knowledge and action, not for making bureaucracy. Once there's your bureaucracy, the whole thing will be spoiled. There must be always individual striving and work and responsibility, competitive spirit, not that one shall dominate and distribute benefits to the others, and they do nothing but beg from you and you provide. No, never mind, there may be botheration to register each center, take tax certificate each, become separate corporations in each state. That will train men how to do these things. And they shall develop reliability and responsibility. That is the point. I'm a little observing now, especially in your country, that our men are losing their enthusiasm for spreading on our programs of Krishna consciousness movement. Otherwise, why so many letters of problems are coming? Dissatisfied. That is not a very good sign. The whole problem is they are not following the regulative principles that I can detect. Without this, enthusiasm will be lacking. Even mechanically following, and if he gets gradually understanding from the class, he will come to the point of spontaneous enthusiasm. This spontaneous loving devotional service is not so easy matter. But if one simply sticks strictly to the rules and regulations, like rising early, chanting 16 rounds, chanting Gayatri, keeping always clean, then his enthusiasm will grow more and more. And if there is also patience and determination, one day he will come to the platform of spontaneous devotion. Then his life will be perfect. All of this I've told you in Nectar of Devotion. So I do not think the leaders are themselves following, nor are they seeing the others are following strictly. That must be rectified at once. Each center remain independent. That's all right. But the president and other officers must themselves follow and see the others are following the regulative principles carefully and giving them good instruction so they may understand nicely while this tapasya is necessary. And GBC and sannyasis will travel and see the officers are doing this. And if they observe anything lowering of the standard, they must reform and advise. Or if there is some discrepancy, I shall remove it. Prabhupada goes on, and towards the end of this letter, Srila Prabhupada mentions there must be always some tapasya, strictly observing the regulative principles. Krishna consciousness movement must be always a challenge, a great achievement to be gained by voluntary desire to do it. And that will keep it healthy. So your big managers now try to train up more and more some competent preachers and managers like yourself. Forget this centralizing and bureaucracy. So Srila Prabhupada here was not very much in favor of this proposal for bureaucracy and centralization. This was a letter from Srila Prabhupada on December 22nd, 1972. At this point, I would like to suggest that Visvakarma Prabhu, who was the temple president of a major temple in Toronto, could explain why this proposal was interfered with at different times in the movement.
We have the experience of dealing with one of the most prominent members back then of the mission, Kirtananda Swamy, who was the first sannyasi initiated by Prabhupada in his mission, and had carried a very high position of authority in the mission of A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Now, he completely ignored these directions from our spiritual master. He had absolutely no respect for Prabhupada's plan for decentralization, which was based on the principle that the temple president would become a representative of Srila Prabhupada in the local area, not the GBC. The GBC, their function, he talks about it, and the goal and the work of the sannyasi were to travel and preach and inspire and enthuse the devotees. But much to our disappointment in Toronto and in other centers, Kirtananda was only interested in promoting his project in New Vrindavan. He was carrying a very sectarian attitude towards everyone else. And he promoted that amongst his membership there, which was growing because he had a farm community that people were attracted to. And so as a result, he did some very despair things in the Toronto community to try to discourage us and myself from carrying on my role as a temple president. For example, at one point he had his men come in the evening while we were resting, and he stole the Prabhupada Murti that was in our temple room. He stole it out of the temple and took it to Pittsburgh. We subsequently learned about this from other people that he had taken out of the temple through his subversive preaching methods. He had a forked tongue. In other words, he would say one thing, but really mean another thing. For example, in the case of the murder of Sulochan, he perpetrated the murder by speaking in such a way that the members there thought the best way to deal with Sulochan would be to kill him. And they did go ahead and kill Sulochan. So this was the way that he carried on in dealing with the temples. He also sent a letter to all of his devotees in Toronto because we were continued to build the movement even after Prabhupada's demise. And I will recall that Prabhupada sent a letter to us that said, that the purchase of this building, which is just up north of the Avenue Road Parliament buildings. In other words, the reason we selected this particular property, one, because Prabhupada had looked at it prior in 1975 and made an effort to buy it, but they said they'd rather burn it down than sell it to A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swamy. So after he left, I took the role of president, and then we started a campaign. And through Krishna's arrangement, which we'll save for another time, the story, the property came up for sale after being sold to developers because they couldn't get a permit to tear the church down. So my lawyer at the time called me and let me know that the church was available. And then we contrived a plan to trick the Christians into selling the building to us on behalf of our guru, Srila Prabhupada. And I had a chance to explain that to him in Sridham Mayapur, subsequently in 1977 at the festival in March. So Prabhupada wrote us a letter after we got the building. He actually sent me a telegram first. He said, congratulations. He was in Nairobi, Africa, and he sent a telegram from there. Congratulations, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swamy Prabhupada. So he was very, very happy that we had got this amazing location for a temple, a big temple in Toronto. We moved from a rented house on Gerrard Street to this beautiful church. It's called the Gateways to Toronto. In other words, you come down Avenue Road, you come down Avenue Road from the 401, all the cars have to pass by the church, and there is another church on the other side. So they're like two pillars called the Gateways to Toronto. And it's just a little bit north of the Parliament buildings and south of Upper Canada College and the richest area in Toronto called Forest Hill. So Prabhupada was fully aware it was a topmost triumph. And he sent me a letter to that effect. It's a topmost triumph that you've been able to get this building for Krishna, because it was in such a prominent area in Canada, which is, Toronto is a main city here in Canada. And the Prabhupada said, erect signs, Hare Krishna signs that would flash the Hare Krishna mantra. And people could chant every day coming to work. At the time, there were 20,000 cars a day passing the temple. Kirtananda writes a letter to his disciples subsequently after Prabhupada's demise, post 77. He writes, "This building is atrocious and should be sold. This is the business of this bureaucracy that we're speaking about, where they're trying to centralize. In his own way, he was trying to centralize the zone around New Vrindavan. He closed Buffalo. Rupanuga Prabhu had got Buffalo going. They had produced all kinds of, let's say, senior devotees. Jagadish came from Buffalo. Lakshmi Moni came from Buffalo. Bhagavan came from Buffalo. Vijayta came from Buffalo, or Tejas, I should say. Gunagrahi came from Buffalo. So all these people were joining in Buffalo. What happened to Buffalo Temple? It's gone. He moved everybody. Actually, the person that murdered Sulochan came from Buffalo. What was his name? Tirtha? Bhakta Tom. He was in Buffalo. So Buffalo was a prosperous, developing temple. It still should be there, but it was closed by the deviant behavior of Kirtananda, Keith Ham. So like this, people that disobey the order of the spiritual master, that cover up the order of the spiritual master, that hide it from other devotees, for the sake of profit and adoration and distinction, like he did, look what his fate was. He was beaten by his disciple with a pipe and crushed his skull. He was put into jail for 7 years for fraud. And in the end, he died in misery, deposed from the Iskcon movement even, somewhere in India somewhere, where he's still worshipped today by Gopal Krishna, the chairman of the GBC. So I hope this gives you some understanding, Yashoda Prabhu, of this is just one small example of the atrocities that were committed in the movement and through the disobedience of our spiritual master, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swamy Prabhupada.
So just one quick point, Prabhus. I just want to refer to this point here where Srila Prabhupada writes, otherwise, management, everything should be done locally by local men. All accounts must be kept, things must be in order and lawfully done. But that should be each temple's concern, not yours. Krishna consciousness movement is for training men to be independently thoughtful and competent in all types of departments of knowledge and action, not for making bureaucracy. Once there's bureaucracy, the whole thing is spoiled. So I wanted to make a comment here that in Sacramento, if someone is to make an Iskcon temple, where Srila Prabhupada is the guru, his original books are there, one must pledge an allegiance to the GBC of West Bengal. So this GBC of West Bengal will be the actual owners of the temple. And they are going to be basically managing the show, and the local devotees are just going to be workers in the temple, meaning that if there's a philosophical deviation, the local devotees cannot take any action. They run the system like a Catholic Church, Vatican-style management, where the local devotees are not empowered, nor are they enthusiastic about pushing on the movement. Because why would I participate when there's someone else that is running the show?
I just want to make a point here that this issue of independent temples, this was Prabhupada's idea right from the beginning. When we look at some of the early letters from Srila Prabhupada, for example, on July 9th, 1971, in a letter to Umapati, Srila Prabhupada writes, GBC members are simply to see that things are going on. Other centers have got president, secretary, etc., and they are managing separately. That is the formula. So how is it that the GBC are the final authority? They are simply to examine that things are going on nicely. That is all. This is a July letter from July 9, 1971. And just a little bit later, on August 12, 1971, Srila Prabhupada writes to Giriraj, GBC does not mean to control a center. GBC means to see that the activities of a center go on nicely. I do not know why Tamal is exercising his absolute authority. That is not the business of GBC. The president, treasurer, and secretary are responsible for managing the center. GBC is to see that things are going on nicely, but not to exert absolute authority. That is not in the power of GBC. Tamal should not do like that. The GBC men cannot impose anything on the men of a center without consulting all of the GBC members first. A GBC member cannot go beyond the jurisdiction of his power. We are in the experimental stage, but in the next meeting of the GBC, members, they should form a constitution how the GBC members manage the whole affair. But it is a fact that the local president is not under the control of the GBC. Yes, for improvement of situations such as this, I must be informed of everything, hoping this meets you in good health. So this is a very important point, because Srila Prabhupada was expecting that these kind of situations would be resolved with the GBC just supervising a temple. For example, in a letter to Tamal Krishna on August 14th, 1971, a few days later, Prabhupada says, we require to hold this important meeting of the GBC to formulate the rules and regulations, how things will be worked on. Sometimes there are complaints against the GBC, which is not very favorable. I set up the GBC with hope that I shall get relief from administration of the mission. But on the contrary, I have become the center of receiving so many complaints. So it is not a relief from me, rather it is becoming a little troublesome. Anyway, by the grace of Krishna, things will be settled up very soon. The foregoing was from a letter on August 14th, 1971. At this point, I just really want to focus. I had a discussion this week with Visvakarma Prabhu and some other devotees. What was the original purpose of Iskcon? In a letter to Kirtananda, of all people, on February 11th, 1967, Srila Prabhupada said, I wish that each and every branch shall keep their independent identity and cooperate, keeping the Acharya in the center. On this principle, we can open any number of branches all over the world. The Ramakrishna Mission works on this principle, and thus, as organization, they have done wonderfully. When we study Srila Prabhupada Srimad Bhagavatam, for example, in the Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto number 4, chapter 22, text number 2 and 3, Srila Prabhupada describes the purport is that one cannot live outside the society of devotees. One must live in the association of devotees, where there is constant chanting and hearing of the glories of the Lord. The Krishna consciousness movement is started for this purpose, so that hundreds of Iskcon centers may give people a chance to hear and chant, to accept the spiritual master, and to disassociate themselves from persons who are materially interested. For in this way, one can make solid advancement in going back home, back to Godhead. It's important to note the words that Srila Prabhupada uses to accept the spiritual master. The spiritual master that he's referring to here is himself. When Srila Prabhupada is removed from being the center of all these Iskcon centers, it just creates chaos. And what we're going to discuss at our next segment is why Srila Prabhupada did not want his leading devotees to go take shelter of various Gaudiya advisors and many very important instructions which Srila Prabhupada gave, which unfortunately were not followed. We're going to discuss this in the next segment. Hare Krishna. All glories to Srila Prabhupada.